I would do anything that, as we say in the film, anybody with a desk and a diploma, I would listen to them, and the whole idea of tough love and you have to be a certain way, and it's not my nature, it's not the way I am built, but I went and did that. You know, at the end of the day, I know my child better than an expert does, and I probably should have trusted my own instinct.
You don't seem very fiery to me. You seem like you
crazy. I get crazy.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
You don't want to set me off.
What do you think? Does the loosey-goosey, warm and fuzzy, non-tough love approach work with drug addicts? Did it work with this one?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
About little Nicky, who's just so picky he can't sit still.
Little Nicky was picky. He often threw a fit, the book opens. In the book, Nicky breaks his mom's vase and is despondent. Nicky awoke at home. His mom was still crying. "Mom, I'm not perfect," he said, "but I'll keep on trying."
And as soon as we go back to the childhood aspect, it's very tempting to dismiss everything as a disorder, as though choices have got nothing to do with who someone eventually becomes in their life.
Was he very troubled as a child?
He had so much energy, and a lot of young boys have that kind of energy where they can't sit still. It is not uncommon. So I never saw it as a massive red flag.
It's not a massive red flag if you know how to channel it, and a good way to channel it is with sport or with exercise, with something physical. A bad way to channel it is by giving a child like that substances which teaches them that is the way to deal with those feelings and that energy. And isn't that what Nick learned in this particular case? Because what does a pill teach, and what does it imbue the person taking it? Well, instant relief. And does life work like that? You might get instant relief from the medication, but you're still in the original problem to begin with. So you don't learn that discipline in terms of how to deal with that adversity in a way where you gain agency and you change that situation, or you learn to handle it in some way or some combination between the two.
Nick Reiner was about 8 years old, and she says he would often interrupt the yoga sessions. Her reaction to the news that her former student is now charged with his parents' murders?
I was just devastated.
So the race is on to diagnose Nick Reiner, and I think the race is also on to pin what happened on a disorder or mental illness. In fact, I've already seen at least one person, a guest who stayed at the house, say these exact words. Cinematographer Barry Markowitz lived with the family for 5 days. According to the Daily Beast, he said, "Nick looked great. He was sitting and talking with the family. They eat dinner together, old school, and there's a lot of love, always a lot of love." Markowitz told the outlet that during his visit, he didn't notice anything strange with Nick. He said Nick was present around the house, playing basketball and tennis, and joined them for dinner. Speaking on the Reiners, he said they were busy working and doing stuff. The help was there, the secretaries were there, in and out of the house, business as usual. Markowitz described his 5-night stay with the Reiners as being a blast, in juxtaposition to recent developments after the Reiners were found dead in their home Sunday. On Nick's mental state, Markowitz said, "It's just a sickness. That's my verdict." When somebody is mentally disturbed, you don't need a reason. There's no rhyme or reason, he said. Mental illness, that's the reason. Personally, I hate assessments like this after the fact. 2 people have been murdered and you still want to paint a warm and fuzzy, all good here, nothing to see here portrait? And you're a cinematographer. You don't see anything wrong with this picture. You didn't see anything wrong with the picture before the fact, even though you've got the end result. At the very least, whatever was eating at Nick, whatever was there to begin with, was worsened, was aggravated by his attempts to soothe it with drugs. And of course, that word is entirely missing from Markowitz's assessment. Without knowing anything about Nick or his family, we know we are dealing with a 32-year-old loser, someone who has basically stayed in that guest house, mooching on his folks by the sounds of it. But because his parents were such wealthy, respected, high achievers, and so were their friends, he had to feel a lot of pressure. And I think he was staying in that guest house something like 5 years. That's something I read somewhere. So, he was there basically from the age of 27 to 32. And prior to that, he was living on the streets, when he was a teenager. And so I think this attempt to make this movie with his father being Charlie was a stab in that direction, trying to reach a kind of parody with his father, and his father reaching out and trying to lift his son up a rung or two. And did that work? The only problem is that insecurity, that underlying insecurity, anxiety, and the soothing of it with drugs persisted. That habit, that habitual feeling and the way of dealing with it persisted. And Rob seemed to be aware that things were deteriorating. One reason he wanted Nick at the party was to keep an eye on him, a decision that blew up badly in their faces. This is also according to the Daily Beast, but in a separate article. However, it was not all smiles for the couple. Reports say the elder Reiner asked if he could bring Nick to the party in West Los Angeles to keep an eye on him. Why? Because he was scared. Rob was scared that Nick's mental state was deteriorating. Well, do you think he was right? O'Brien, 62, must have given the okay because the 32-year-old Nick tagged along with his parents but clearly did not want to be there, according to eyewitnesses. Nick appeared out of place and eventually got into a shouting match with his parents that was in earshot of the other guests. The couple then left the party shortly after. Now, it's not clear whether Nick stormed off and the couple followed and the couple then took him home. The Daily Beast completely skips that part from the timeline, but it does appear the trio left the party relatively early, certainly prematurely, and that would then give time before Saturday became Sunday for there to be a aftermath to that, a argument in the home, and then also the settling down of that where the parents then go to bed, and also even basically an ultimatum of a situation where the parents say, this can't go on, we just can't do this anymore, you are going to have to go to rehab, and Nick absorbing this information. I think what is repeated is that Nick was at the party asking people if they were famous, and that's easy to dismiss as just ranting, right? The irony is, of course, that he isn't famous, that he wasn't famous until now. And so I think, in a sense, this was his most authentic moment. This was his gripe with the world. And his world was Hollywood, where everyone is famous. Everybody is a somebody. Now imagine being a nobody in a world like that, or feeling like a nobody in that world. And I've actually driven through there myself, and I felt quite intimidated, just in terms of the tremendous amount of wealth and prestige and power and influence that is in California. California, just that whole state, certainly Irvine and Thousand Oaks and LA and Malibu, but especially, Brentwood, is a very hard place to afford to even to stay. And so if you're a nobody and you're staying there, don't you feel like a bit of an interloper? And so that feeling is persisting, that you are nobody amongst somebodies. And you can pretend to be a somebody amongst all these somebodies, but are they going to go along with it? And so the more he took drugs to quell that feeling, the more of a nobody became, even within the confines of his own family. The question, and remember, he's the middle child here, and I think often the middle child feels that pressure in a different way, feels that invisibility in a more profound way. And so the question is the answer to this, in terms of managing a person who's going through this, is it really unconditional love? Or should the person be encouraged to excel and to try harder and to do better and to work harder? And so if we go back to Markowitz, he says what's puzzling the most, the 360, is that there was so much love that it doesn't jive. I'm not here to judge anyone. Love is the only thing I saw, and I don't think it was fake. They had a real bond. Well, the double murders proved they absolutely didn't have a bond. The only bond here was Nick's commitment to drugs. And so is love the answer to drug addiction? You may say there's nothing stronger than love. Well, there is drug addiction. For the drug addict, the love of that addiction, the love of those drugs, the love of that feeling of being high. galling as it may be to hear, that feeling may trump the feelings you get from a human being, the assurances you get from a human being, even from your own parents. And so who is the real love of Nick's life, and who was what was basically there all along? His closest companion, even closer than his parents.
It was with us all the way.
And you don't get rid of it by tolerating it. According to the New York Post, Nick Reiner threw terrifying tantrums as a child that escalated when he struggled with drug abuse. So you see, the underlying problem is exacerbated by the drugs, even though the user feels perhaps differently about it. But the reality is that these issues are aggravated by the drug abuse. The problems that are already there are aggravated by the drug abuse. As I say, the person using them doesn't feel that way. And these insights aren't just superficial. They come from a family friend who's known Nick his whole life. He says that the outbursts were so violent that Nick Reiner often had to be physically held back by his father, with the unidentified lifelong friend telling the Daily Mail of seeing so much anger in his eyes even as a kid. And anger, as we all know, is born of fear, born of anxiety.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
And Nick's great fear was death, social death. Not just that, but a life without significance, which feels like death. Especially when that life is within this enclave of people vastly more significant, if you want to use that word, influential, consequential than what he was. He is raging ultimately against his own lack of agency, his weakness, his powerlessness. And of course, every time he takes drugs to soothe those feelings, he reinforces that sense of powerlessness, weakness, that inability to meet life on its own terms. Many of the family fights had to do with Nick just doing something self-destructive and fighting back when they tried to help him, the friend said. The unnamed friend who had spoken with Nick's grieving older brother Jake this week believes that Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, babied their son, who spent most of his life in and out of drug rehab programs, which is why I think calling him a poor little rich boy is adequate and appropriate and rings true. And the right way to deal with kids like that isn't by feeling sorry for them.
Breaking news, this video just in moments ago. It shows Nick Reiner being arrested right near USC. You can see an LAPD unit racing to the intersection of Exposition and Vermont. Once an officer gets out of the car, you can see Reiner put his hands up.
Why shouldn't you feel sorry for them? Because they have got oodles of self, they've got more than enough self-pity for themselves already. The taking of the drugs is really a kind of feeling sorry for themselves as it is. And yet towards the end of their lives, that's Rob and Michelle's, they seem to have allowed Nick to have his way being not going to rehab, his way being the easy way out, his way being the path of least resistance. And it seems like he murdered them when they finally realized this wasn't working and they were going to have to get tougher on him after all.
Moments before this, Reiner was seen across the street and inside a convenience store purchasing a drink. That's him there. This all happened Sunday night, hours after his father, actor-director Rob Reiner, and his mother, Michelle, were found dead inside their Brentwood home.
And when you see him wandering around by himself, buying things that he needs to basically feel better. I mean, he's nourishing himself not with proper food. That is a lifelong habit that he still hasn't been able to break, and this is where it leads. In any event, I'm not going to take it further than that. If you found this analysis worthwhile, meaningful, important, please do hit the thanks button. If you haven't subscribed, please do. In the next episode, I want to do an analysis of the gaps and questions, some very real questions surrounding the timeline. Some of it doesn't seem to make sense. Well, until then, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.